Welcome to another episode of Chat's Chat. Join Chad Chelius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by the North Idaho College and the upcoming Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene, which is on August 3rd and 4th in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. More information on the Alley Camp Symposium can be found at nic.edu/A11Y camp. So we thank them for being our sponsor for today's podcast. My name is Chad Chelius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as Director of Training Solutions and Principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm Director of Media Productions, and Chad and I are both certified as Accessible Document Specialists by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you are looking to get your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications. Chad, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Another week. We're plugging away. Working. I'm working on my first Arabic document this week. This one's a new one for me. Really interesting. I mean, I didn't do any of the translation, of course, right? I'm just making the document accessible, but the whole concept of the right to left language is really, really interesting, you know?
Yes.
And even what I found interesting, even the go to next and previous page is reversed.
Right, because the page order is right to left instead of left to right. So it's definitely...
Dax, do they read from the back of the book to the front? I mean, I know it's not for them.
No.
But, okay. So it is...
But it is still cover, but it's cover, right, left, right, left. Japan is back to front.
Got it.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting, especially when you're working in InDesign and you're moving your cursor around. It's hard to get used to its opposite direction of where you think you're going. Your brain just has to make that connection.
It is, and even when you select text,
yes,
because like there's numbered lists in this document.
Yep,
and the number is on the right. So if it's like, let's say it's section 6.1.2.
Yep.
From right to left, it says 6.1.2, and then a bunch of text I don't understand. But it's just interesting. I love learning new stuff and learning about new things, and it's kind of fun. It's fun and interesting at the same time.
But what's refreshing is that the tags tree is universal.
Yeah.
Right. The tags are the tags are the tags. And I don't have to know what it says to know that that's an H1 or that this is a list with 6 items or that it's to tag it appropriately. You don't necessarily need an understanding of the language. You need to be able to visually tell what's a heading and not a heading. Right. But I think overall you do all it's about order of operations, right? This is where document workflow makes a difference because you get the text vetted, you get a final format, and then you make it accessible. But if you build the accessibility things into the styles and into the structure, you shouldn't have to do a lot of massaging at the end in the PDF, right? And so there's nothing worse than having a typo in a language you don't speak and you have no idea it's there, right? So it's so important to make sure that you validate that copy before you start down the rest of the path. But starting with a good document structure, a good InDesign or a good style structure is super key. Wouldn't you agree?
I totally do. I will tell you though, working on this document reminds me of, why construction companies quote their projects so high. And it's because they have no idea what they're getting into, right? And so like in this document, for example, I opened it up and everything was tagged using XML. And so right off the bat, I'm like, right? So I untagged everything. And then I had issues where like they had a bulleted list, but they were mapping it to a P tag.
Right.
And as many of our listeners know, when you do that, now those bulleted lists are not tagged as a list. They're just tagged as regular paragraphs. So things like that, I've had to, I've exported it, I think 5 or 6 times already. So I hope I'm getting to the end of it. But anyway.
Well, what's interesting though, Chad, you bring up a good point, is that it's a lot of people often miss is in the workflow of creating your accessible PDF. You vet your your InDesign or your source document, you export a PDF, and before you start making any changes to that PDF, you need to walk the tags tree and make sure that everything is right. Because imagine you just start like, oh, I export it. You start on page 1 and you start moving tags or renaming things, and you start moving stuff around, and then you get to the section that has bullets in it, and all of a sudden these are all P tags. Now what? Right? Yep. You've done 2 hours or an hour's worth of work, and you've got to, the answer. The answer is go back to the source and map the P tag, map it correctly to automatic so that the bullets come through. But you've already done this work. So it's so important. Walk that tags tree before you start doing any of the accessibility work in your PDF to make sure that your source document is solid.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I was doing. Although the one thing that I had been doing is I am flattening the container tags first, just because it makes walking the tags tree a little bit easier, So, but that doesn't take much time for me to do. But as I was going through, that's when I was noticing. I'm like, oh wait, why are these bulleted lists wrong? Right.
Right.
And this would be a fun we should make like an accessibility Trivial Pursuit game or something, because you're walking the tags tree and you come to a bulleted list and they're not tagged as a list. What could be the problem, right? And
oh my gosh, it's a choose your own adventure for PDF. Right? Oh my gosh. Oh, Chad, I hate you, because you know what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back and have to try to make one of these up, because I just cannot. Oh no. My gosh. The other day I was thinking about doing flashcards for the tags inside the tags tree. One of those Facebook made me buy it moments. There's an ad on my Facebook, and it had this guy that had this deck of cards, and it happened to be something about presenting. It was like tips for presenting, right? It had nothing to do with accessibility, but there were several different decks of cards that had to deal with certain topics. And the idea was that on one side you had some premise, and on the back side you had enriching information. And I thought that'd be really cool to have the section tag on one side of the card and then anecdotal information about a section tag on the back.
Yeah.
I think that'd be kind of cool.
Well, our listeners, our friends, our followers, they keep making more work for us. Right?
I swear.
Because I taught a class last week, and somebody asked me, do you have a handout that describes the purpose of every possible tag that you could use in an accessible PDF? And no. But now I'm going to have to make one, right?
Chad, I've got a slide deck you need to see. I got to share this with you. I'm surprised you haven't seen it yet. But my WCAG in plain English, my Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in plain English, goes over some of those tags. Matter of fact, I think my handout for Creative Pro Week for last year, 2022, was understanding the tags tree. And there is a whole section in there on what the different tags are and what they mean. Matter of fact, I'm sure there is. So I'll have to give you that source, because it's a great. We should be able to come up with that list pretty quickly.
Yeah, maybe repurpose that a bit. Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, Chad. So today I wanted to talk about an article that I literally just posted to LinkedIn. So it came to my understanding there's a company called Barrier Break. Right. And they just released a survey that they did on accessibility teams in organizations. And it's wondering what is the in-house accessibility team strength in organizations. And this was by Shilpi Kapoor. And she wrote, after 20 years in accessibility, I knew the answer to this, but I wanted to see what my LinkedIn network told me about the size of the in-house accessibility team in organizations. In other words, she found out or realized that a lot of companies are starting to internalize their accessibility teams rather than just hire out. And she asked the question, okay, what size are those teams?
Yeah. Yeah. And the article you wrote, basically talks about, that most of those teams are like 1 to 5 people, right?
Right. That's what her study. So her study says that 45% of the companies have teams that are less than, 1 to 5 people, and that 37.5% have teams over 20 people, which I thought was interesting, that the 6 to 20 is kind of like 11 and 6.5%. It was really kind of the small number, but either you have a really big team or a really small team. But then her article her findings go to say something else. And it says, out of the 20 plus team size, 61% were delivering IT services to customers. So in other words, the methodology for tagging, for telling who gets to do accessibility is one of 2 ways. Either, hey, IT department, you guys are now doing accessibility, it's your job. Or, hey, single person, 1 to 5 person small team, it's your job to manage the accessibility workflow and make sure that everything's accessible. So it's either one of 2 paths, which I thought was an interesting approach.
Well, and you and I end up consulting for a lot of different companies of a wide variety of sizes, right?
Right.
And I can tell you that in my experience, and I'm curious, what you're going to weigh in on here, but the 1 to 5 number, to be honest, usually the size of the team is like 2.
Yes.
Usually on the size of like 2, maybe 3 if you're lucky.
Yep.
And so, but in what we were just talking about, oftentimes they do push it off to IT.
Right.
Right. And I think because it's viewed as a fairly technical skill.
I think it's because it has the web content accessibility guidelines. They're like, web, okay, that's IT.
That's
right?
IT, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, right? That a lot of companies are facing. One of my big clients, and I hope that we're going to have them on as a guest in very soon in an upcoming podcast. I'm not going to tell you the name of the company yet because I want it to be a surprise, but they are a very large organization, and they made accessibility a company-wide effort.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was a really smart approach to the problem, right? Like, instead of saying like, hey, John and Susan, you guys are the accessibility people right now, they said, hey, listen, we all need to be involved in this. We all need to be part of this effort. And I have to say, it has worked for them very, very successfully. Very successfully.
Chad, I do a presentation called Implementing Accessibility Within Your Organization. And one of the things I talk about is that the method of implementation is key in how successful your attempt at creating an accessibility workflow in your organization is, because you can do it typically one of 2 ways. It's either top-down approach, where you get buy-in from the CEOs or from the C-suite executives, or a grassroots approach where you talk to all the content creators and you get buy-in there, right? And we know that the common sense tells us the grassroots approach may be more direct. It's often fraught with struggle because people don't want to spend the billable time. And why are you working on this? Who told you to do that? Why are, getting that buy-in from their supervisor is hard enough, let alone figuring out how they're going to include it on their time card when they say, I spent 2 hours trying to make this document accessible. They're like, what? Well, and so there's that whole conversation. But when your CEO or your executive of a company says, this is what we're going to do, it's so much easier to implement when it comes to getting that buy-in, because everybody falls in line and it's like, okay, now what? Now, how do we do this? Right.
And you don't need approval. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you're like, oh, we're doing this new thing. I got to get approval, or I got to get, approval from your manager or their manager or whatever. the effort is, or from the top down, they said, listen, we are doing this. This is going to happen, and we all need everybody to be on board. We all need everybody to kind of collectively work towards this ultimate goal. And I mean, we see a lot of companies struggling with this part of the equation. And, that's one of the things that we do is we'll go in and kind of help those companies through the challenges, right?
Yeah. And the companies we see this most in are banking and finance. I mean, this falls right in line with the article that we were referencing here. Again, it's Barrier Break is the company that released the article, and Shilpi Kapoor is the person who wrote it. It is she notes IT services, banking and finance, education, product and software companies, and consulting services. Now, the architectural engineering construction world is something close to my heart, and I'm finding that more and more companies, HDR, Jacobs, AECOM, Stantec, they're all, and that's not just all of them, WSP, they're all creating teams within their organizations to handle accessibility. And they've really decided, we need to get a handle and control on what it is. One of the hardest things, Chad, is the QA/QC when you hire out accessibility to a third-party organization. And whether that's offshore or local, the quality you get, if you don't understand accessibility yourself, you're just hoping, you're just saying, hey, I trust you that you say this is accessible, but the reality is when you give it to the client or the client gets sued or something else happens, that's on you. And there's a lot of risk there.
Well, Dax, in your article, you actually talk about the 3 reasons why a company would want to insource their accessibility team versus outsource it.
Yeah. Yeah. So outsourcing accessibility, I think the number one reason is that it can be expensive, right? That, you if you're not trained in how to make your documents accessible and you hand those off to a remediation company, they're going to bill you accordingly, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to account for their time, right?
The hardest part of my job, honestly, I feel, is like when somebody says, how much is it going to cost to make this document accessible? Right. And they'll usually send me a PDF and I'll be like, well, am I going to get the source file? And that's a loaded question, right? Like right. Even if I get the source file, how that file is created significantly impacts the level of effort required to make it accessible. Right. If it
that's where you and I come in, right? Because that's part of why we train people. We come in and train teams to make content more accessible in the source file, because you could substantially reduce the amount of cost it costs, the cost in making a document accessible if you did most everything and you're just solving for a few minor, things that maybe you don't understand from an accessibility level. If you're using styles and adding alt text and doing the basic things you need to do, the accessibility lift at the end can be quite minor, and you might be paying $1 or $2 a page versus a complete nightmare that might be $10 to $20 a page, or maybe you're paying an hourly rate, and that extra effort is the difference between getting billed 30 minutes for the time versus 2 hours worth of time.
Well, and I think a lot of times, people have this perception that accessibility is hard. Right. And that they're learning about accessibility and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. And I think part of that reason is because they're not just learning the tag structure of a PDF and the importance of headings and all of the fundamental elements. They also have to kind of relearn the source document that they've been using for 20 or 25 years.
Right.
What I mean? It's like, I've been using Word for 25 years, and, here we come in and basically tell them that they've been using it incorrectly, Yeah.
And pride comes into a lot of it,
It does. And it's not that we're being, I don't want to sound like we're coming off rude or like we're putting you down in any way. It's just that for accessibility, you've got to leverage the features in those source applications. And if you have not leveraged those features, even if you give me the file, my job just got harder. You know what I mean? And so, it's often perceived as accessibility is often perceived as being difficult. It's really not as hard as it's perceived to be. It's just that people are often required to learn more than, what they may be bargained for. You know what I mean? That they come to a class and they expect to say, oh, do this, this, and this to make a document accessible. But in reality, it ends up being this, and this,
And it depends on these other 15 different requirements. Chad, that goes right into the next, my second point, which in the article, which I posted on LinkedIn, by the way, if people want to look at. So our CHACS Training and Consulting now has a LinkedIn page. So if you search CHACS Training and Consulting on LinkedIn, you'll find our company page, and there is the article there. But the second point was, the excuse is typically our workflow requires a tight turnaround time. And that flows right into what you were just saying, Chad. And that if your premise is accessibility is hard, well, then we can't do it because we only have a certain amount of time. It's due by this day, and we're not going to get the document until 15 minutes before it's due. There's no way we're going to be able to make it accessible in 15 minutes, right? But
absolutely.
To your point, if you've been doing accessibility along the way, it's save as PDF, open it up. Maybe you're adding the PDF UA identifier, running the checker. Oh, I missed a piece of alt text. Boom, you're done. And off it goes.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's the reality. And so these internal teams allow why people are bringing this in-house is because they think that it helps eliminate some of that turnaround time to sending it out to a third party to have it remediated. But the truth is, if your team isn't trained on best practices along the way, it doesn't really change outsource, insource, right?
And I could see how it could get expensive, right? Yeah. I mean, for example, like I actively do remediation for a company, and I could tell you, I have to keep a track of all the jobs that I work on. Most jobs take me 20 minutes.
Sure.
That is the average length of time it takes me to do a project. And that's because the documents are created very well. Right.
Right.
And, so everything is in place. I just need to massage it. I'm really just kind of fine tuning it. Right. But every now and then I'll open up a file and I get that dialogue that says, hey, there's no tags in this document. And I'm like, and so now that level of effort just has exponentially increased because I'm starting from literally ground zero. Zero. I got to tag everything manually. And it's because, I wasn't provided with a good starting point.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. The last point is one that I think is a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I think it's important to talk about. And the third typical reason people start bringing an in-house accessibility team is they have a new commitment to DREI, which for those of you who are not familiar, diversity, racial equity, and inclusion. It used to be DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right. And I am 100% for anything that promotes the fair treatment of everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, religion, skin color, background, marriage status, anything you want to put out. Humans should be treated equally. I don't care what your status is. Okay.
100%.
But I also feel like that accessibility and disability really kind of get bolted on once people start with DEI or DREI, and then they say, and then someone brings up the point, but where are we talking about disability? Right. And I even think some people even think that the DEI stands for disability, equity, and inclusion, when it's really diversity. And then some people are like, well, diversity is part of accessibility and people in wheelchairs and all of that. And it's just this secondary thought. And it actually kind of upsets me that it really is when, equity really should be, and I agree racial equity is a thing, but equity should really include disability and accessibility, equal access to information. Yeah. And I think some companies just aren't prepared for that. I had a call earlier today where I was talking with somebody. Actually, you and I, Chad, were on this call together with a client talking about how I met someone who was like, how do I hire more people for my company that have disabilities? And I said, well, how many pictures of people with disabilities do you have on your website? None. Okay, do you have an accessibility statement on your website? No. Are your forms accessible? Do you talk about accessibility or disability anywhere, accommodations, or your commitment to any of that on your website? No. Okay, well, if I'm in a wheelchair, I have a disability, maybe not just a wheelchair, but any disability, and I'm going to apply for an organization. If I look on the website and I don't see any thought about the issue that I have, or that you understand my situation, the first thing I think of is, if I apply to this job, I'm going to have to disclose my disability. I'm going to have to figure out whether or not they have accommodations for me. I mean, it starts all those questions and all of that. And you're just like, this is a lot of work. And you either choose to move on or you don't. But if all of those boxes are checked, if you have things in place that lets a person know that you're welcome, that we're planning for you, that we understand that we need to make accommodations for you to be who you are, then they're more likely to apply. And he went, wow, I never really thought about that. And it's like, people want to hire people with disabilities. They want to be inclusive. They want to provide all the opportunities. But what are you showing people? How readily apparent are you making it that you're prepared for them to be part of your organization?
For sure, Dax. And a lot of what we do is really about awareness. Right. I mean, we do a lot of, the technical side of accessibility and all that, but also a lot of what we do is just making people aware. Right. And when you had mentioned about going to somebody's website and seeing if they have an accessibility statement, I wanted to add, or their website isn't accessible. Right. That's another like red flag for somebody who's looking for a job. And, getting back to the DREI, I mean, do not quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure in its infancy, it may have just been called DI, diversity and inclusion. Like, I think that might have been, I think at a point like that is what they were referring to. And I suppose if we wanted to, Dax, accessibility would be incorporated in the inclusion portion of that statement. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Right. But it's not implicitly stated, right? And I think that's kind of the discussion we were having with our client earlier today, where, oftentimes when the topic of DREI is brought up, there's, people think of certain things when they hear that term, but accessibility is often something that is not thought about. And I think, that the statement needs to potentially be updated to include accessibility because that needs to be included inside of that statement.
No, I agree. I definitely agree. So I think it is interesting that people are bringing these teams in-house, right? And, I kind of start this article with, the fact that most in-house teams just can't find the right training. Right? It's okay. You two are now in charge of accessibility. And they're like, okay, let me Google document accessibility. Right. And then you get every sort of thing. I was doing some research today on another article, and somebody was talking about blank cells in a table. And I can't tell you how many websites I pulled up where, from major universities to corporations to guidelines, where all of them said you can never have a blank data cell inside your table. And I'm like, yeah, you can. And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No.
And so there's this misinformation that's out there. There's people who don't understand. On our PDF accessibility Facebook group, somebody else posted just yesterday about nesting heading level tags and paragraph tags inside each other like it was HTML, right? It's, it is this, it is a terribly rocky road when you first start out in accessibility in understanding what it is that you're supposed to do. And that's kind of where you and I come in, right? And this is not to plug, well, it is to plug our services, but this is where we can help your teams, right? We can come in and give you all of our knowledge in my Facebook group and on LinkedIn. I've actually made this post a couple of times. If you spend more than 15 minutes struggling on a document for accessibility or a principle for accessibility, reach out to us, because we've been there. We know the solutions. We have them. We've done it. We are prepared to give it to you. You just got to ask, right? And I did some one-on-one tutoring with a person on our Facebook group, and she's like, I've been working on this document for 2 days, wringing my hands, trying to figure out what to do. I'm like, why? Just reach out. We can help you. And then in 20 minutes, I gave her 3 different solutions, and one of them was the one she wanted to go with, so it was all good.
Yeah, I mean, if you start off in accessibility by Googling, document accessibility, you're in for a labyrinth of misinformation. It's honestly, it's unfortunate, right, Dax? Because I think I don't think it's malicious in any way. But I think there's just so much information out there that leads people down the wrong path. I know a lot of times when we go into companies, I wish I had the little thing like in Men in Black, where I could wipe people's memory of everything they currently know about accessibility, and just be like, okay, we're starting over, right? So it's always interesting and it's fun. I enjoy when people have that aha moment. Right. When you can explain to them and you're like, well, no, this is not how you want to organize it. This is how you want to organize it. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. So, I think what we do is very rewarding in that respect, because I love, it's the whole teach a man to fish principle, right? I mean, I don't want all your remediation work. I don't want it. Yeah. I would rather see you be able to do it. And, there's way too much remediation work in the world for us to handle it all. Right.
I agree. Awesome. Well, Chad, I really love these talks, man. I think it's so great. And, we received some feedback from our, matter of fact, you forwarded me the feedback from one of our students from one of our classes. And I thought it was great. Maybe we should share it with our listeners.
Yeah.
So what this person wrote, and I won't disclose who it is or what company they work for, but it's an AEC. It's an engineering firm. And it says, this is regarding taking our certification for document accessibility testing with NVDA. And that person says, I feel like I got it the first time. You two were clear, provided fabulous handouts, and answered questions on the fly, answered questions on unrelated topics, and paced the learning so that we could keep up with writing notes. It was a terrific session. The content was as promised, right? So this person said, one of the unexpected tidbits I got from the session was the idea of not using the mouse when walking the tags tree. This has taken my 508 thinking to a whole new level. It's these comments like this, honestly, Chad, that just fuel me to just want to do more. I just want to reach out to more people. And I know it sounds corny, but man, it literally just tugs at my heartstrings to know that people are getting this kind of epiphany moment when they are, attending our trainings.
Absolutely. It's we're all in this together. We all experience these challenges together, and for you and I mean, it's just kind of like years of learning and figuring things out and having those aha moments ourselves. Right. Like where you figure something out, you're like, oh my gosh, like I've been struggling with this for so long, and all of a sudden you figure out the problem and life becomes much easier. So
I will tell you the one that I use every single day, and I'm still in awe every single day when I do it. It's the context key on the keyboard. I don't have to use the mouse anymore. I can use it to select the tag, the initial tag that I want, or maybe use the arrow keys to up or down to the right tag. And then all I have to do is press that context key and enter, context key and enter. And I can create 8 different, LI tags typically is what I'm doing them for, 8 different LI tags very, very quickly without having to go back and right click and go to this and go to that. It's one of those things that once my brain was open to this experience of using the context key, I'm just in awe every time I use it.
This is one of the few times where as a Mac user, I hang my head in shame because the Macs do not have the context key.
Wah, wah, wah.
Wah, wah, wah. I know. You're going to lose sleep tonight over that, aren't you?
Yeah.
But, I do, I have Windows and Mac, so I do need to remember that. And you're absolutely right, because I used that the other day when I was trying to do a bunch of things really quickly. And that context key really is very, very nice. All right, guys. Well, I think that brings us to the end of another hopefully informative podcast, guys. As we've said before, we want to know what you think. If you have any feedback, reach out to either Dax or I on LinkedIn, or certainly email us at training@accessibilityunraveled.com or chad@accessibilityunraveled.com. We really would love to know what you think of the podcast. So once again, we want to thank the North Idaho College and the upcoming Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene on August 3rd and 4th in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. More information on the Alley Camp Symposium can be found at nic.edu/A11Y camp. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training, or struggling to establish an accessibility program within your organization, head over to accessibilityunraveled.com. My name is Chad Chelius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.